More interviews for Kamala Harris. She was on MSNBC with Stephanie Rule lately. She did a great job. Another great job where people think that she's afraid to sit down for an interview because she has no answers. That's really not the case. What Kamala Harris needed to do is she was just thrown into this race by her president saying that I am stepping down from this race and I would like to nominate you. He called her, told her his plan, and said, I want to suggest you as the nominee. Just so everybody knows out there, that doesn't mean she automatically won. He suggested it. The Democrats all got together and said, should we run somebody else against her? Maybe there's one or two of them that said we should, but at the end of the day, they all came together and said, no, we feel comfortable with her. And they moved forward with her. And at this point, it appears as if it has been a great decision. But the reason why she didn't instantly go out and do interviews is because she had to prepare a plan. She had to sit down. She's not like Donald Trump, who just whims off the top of his head and says a bunch of bullshit that's never going to come true. She really legitimately wants to put together a plan. She wants to put together her agenda, and then I'll go out and start doing more interviews, and then I'll go out and start telling people what my plan is. Keep in mind, this was only just a couple short months ago that she was thrown into this race. So from what has happened from that time to now has been nothing short of remarkable. But this is her with Stephanie Rule, and her first question was, and it's a good question, if you ask people about the economy right now, most people had said in these polls that Donald Trump was better for the economy than Kamala Harris. And Stephanie Rule is curious about that and asked Kamala Harris about that particular question as to why that is. And this was her answer.
Years, there have been tremendous economic wins. And you've just laid out a big plan. But still, polling shows that
real quick, and that's the most frustrating thing is what she said at first, is that there have been a ton of economic wins. And if you really do listen to economists, if you do really care about what's happening in this country with the economy, outside that you pay more for eggs and milk, and I'm not discounting that, by the way, because I'm paying more for food. And I explained that earlier as to why we are paying more for food and milk and things of that nature. But economically, in this country right now, we are doing incredibly well. The stock market and S&P today, which isn't necessarily an overall picture of the economy. I understand that. Hopefully you understand that. But if you look at your 401ks, if you look at anything that you have investments in, they are doing better now than they ever have in the history of this country, because the S&P and the stock market again closed for the stock market closed for, I think, a 32nd straight record high, and the S&P was over 40 straight, or not straight, but 40-time record high of the S&P. And this is all done during, most of it is done during the Biden-Harris administration. So it is frustrating that a lot of people don't understand how well the economy is doing because they conflate it with the inflation. But the economy is doing incredibly well. Again, Google it. Just say, is the economy doing well in the United States of America? And get your answer.
Most likely voters still think Donald Trump is better to handle the economy. Why do you think that is?
Well, here's what I know in terms of the facts. Donald Trump left us with the worst economy since the Great Depression when you look at, for example, the employment numbers.
It was during COVID, and employment was so high because we shut down the government, we shut down the country.
Now, that's actually, Stephanie Rule did a great job there because she is exactly right. But Kamala Harris's answer is going to be, right as well. But it is important to note that a lot of the things that happened under the Trump administration, where the economic numbers tumbled, like the job losses, the stock market, all that stuff, it's important to note that COVID did hit. But what drives me insane is that if we're going to acknowledge that the economy took a major hit because of COVID, then you have to acknowledge that the economy continued that way because of COVID. COVID didn't just stop because Donald Trump was out of office and Joe Biden took over. If you look at all the economic numbers, everything bad that Joe Biden had taken over had turned around completely. And now everything is way, way, way better economically. But let's let her finish her answer.
For the pandemic, he lost manufacturing jobs by most people's estimates, at least 200,000. He lost manufacturing plants. Ask the auto workers how he lost auto plants. We have grown over 20 new auto plants. He has an agenda. Let's just deal with it right now going forward, not to mention what happened in the past. He has an agenda that would include making it more difficult for workers to earn overtime, an agenda that would include cutting off access to small business loans for small businesses, an agenda that includes tariffs to the point that the average working person will spend 20% more on everyday necessities and an estimated $4,000 more a year on those everyday necessities, to the point that top economists in our country, from Nobel laureates to people at Moody's and Goldman Sachs, have compared my plan with his and said my plan would grow the economy, his would shrink the economy. Some of them have actually assessed that his plan would increase inflation and invite a recession by the middle of next year. So the facts remain that Donald Trump has a history of taking care of very rich people. And I'm not mad at anybody for being rich, but they should pay their fair share. But tax cuts for the billionaires and the top corporations in our country, and then not really paying much attention to middle-class families. My perspective on the economy is when you grow the middle class, America's economy is stronger. And there's empirical evidence to prove my point correct.
I want to ask anybody when they're polled that they feel that Donald Trump is better for the economy than Kamala Harris would be. Explain to me why, unless you don't know this information, but if you do know this information, explain to me why you would take the word over a guy who has filed for bankruptcy and has pretty much ruined every business he has ever put his hands on. Maybe you don't know this. Maybe you don't know how awful he was as a business person. But why would you put more trust in him over economists who say clearly that Kamala Harris's economic plan would be better for the economy? And not only that, the Donald Trump's economic plan, the way he has it laid out, and the very few things that he has said that he wants to do for the economy and his economic plan, which is to place a full board tariff on every good that comes into this country from other countries. Even Mitch McConnell the other day said that that is a terrible thing. Every economist says all that's going to do is raise taxes and raise prices on the American people, and it is going to send us into a recession by next year. This is what economists say. So on what planet is Donald Trump a better person for the economy? Actually, on what planet is Donald Trump better than Kamala Harris or anybody else pretty much you want to name better as a president than Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney? I don't care who you want to throw out there, unless you're going to throw out like Marjorie Taylor Greene or somebody like that. But I'm talking about somebody seriously, explain it to me. I'm happy to. I say this all the time. I almost say it every week on the show. If you're watching this and it's counter to what I'm saying, please explain to me. Say it in the comments. You can email me at runshousepodcast.com. runshousepodcast@gmail.com. You can explain it to me. Just explain it to me, and I promise you I will investigate it. And if I investigate it and find that you're right, I will come on the show and I will read verbatim what you sent to me so I can straighten out exactly what I am trying to tell people, what Kamala Harris is trying to tell people. But there's been a phenomenal conduit and to the campaign for Kamala Harris, and that has been Mark Cuban. He has been all over the place. Now, Mark Cuban is a real billionaire. He is a self-made billionaire. This guy actually understands money. He understands the economy. He initially was a Donald Trump supporter. When Donald Trump first came around, he looked at him and goes, hey, you know what? Maybe we take the politicians, the lifelong politicians out of this, and maybe he's somebody that can do something different for this country. And he had explained that where he quickly changed his mind is that he would listen to Donald Trump. And that really should do it for most people with at least a junior high school education, is just listen to this guy and understand he has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. And Mark Cuban has said, yeah, I mean, I listened to him, and he really didn't have any explanation on how he was going to do things. He would just say things randomly, but there was no explanation. There was no plan, and he had absolutely no interest in an explanation or a plan. He just liked saying things. But this is him on with Jake Tapper on CNN, and he is talking about Donald Trump, first of all, as being the true socialist, and that Kamala Harris and her price gouging plan is not socialism at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite, and explains this out a little bit better.
Campaign call, you compared policy proposals made by Trump to those from independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist. What do you mean?
Well, it was a race for socialism, right? Bernie said that credit card companies should cap their rates, their interest rates, at 15%. Donald Trump, being the socialist that he is, had to beat Bernie. So Donald Trump went out and recommended that interest rate caps be set to 10%. I mean, the fact that he's even suggesting price controls and price caps is socialism 101. You haven't heard that from the vice president. You have heard that from Donald Trump.
Well,
then
how do you interpret?
How
do you interpret what she's doing in terms of price gouging, taking on price gouging by food companies? Because a lot of critics have said that that is a form of price controls.
I hope Jake Tapper asked him that question as a setup for the answer that Mark Cuban's about to give, because I'm hoping that Jake Tapper is not conflating the two. But let's listen to Mark Cuban's answer. Uh-oh. Mark? Hold on. I am hearing, by the way, the heavier rain and the winds are coming in from this hurricane. So I don't know if this at all has anything to do. It says that I still have internet access. So let's see. Let me remove this and let's see if I can add this back in. Let's see if it works. Because my clips might be done here. This hurricane's coming. Let me see if this one plays.
No, there is a reason.
Okay, so maybe I'm gonna try this one more time. Sorry, guys, because I really would like for you to hear his answer. All right, so that one for some reason is no longer on there. But basically, what he was saying was what I was saying earlier about the price gouging, is that Kamala Harris is holding companies responsible during times of pandemics or a hurricane that is coming our way. If something is happening, we are not going to allow these companies just to jack up their prices and say we need to do it because of emergency purposes. You know, these companies that raised their prices during that time were bragging about their profits. You should never be able to make record profits during emergency times in this country. Does anybody listening to me when I say that, does anybody disagree? If you disagree with that, I would love to hear why you disagree that companies should still be able to jack up prices even in the detriment of people like you and me and everybody else watching this podcast, or anybody else that has that particular question. Explain to me why that is okay. And again, I'll look at it and see if it makes sense. And if it makes sense, I will repeat that on the next show. But Mark Cuban's done a great job for Kamala Harris, and you can see how passionate he is. And, you know, this is not a one-off. There are tons of people who were either a Trump supporter at one point or they were lifelong Republicans. And more of them are coming out and speaking out, not just against Donald Trump, but they are saying, I am voting for Kamala Harris because, A, she's got a plan. She has the best interest of the American people. Will everything that she's saying come to fruition, and will everything come true? Let's cross our fingers and hope it does. There's a possibility it won't, because presidents can't get every single thing done. There are a lot of people in this country who believe that you're president and you just go in there and say, do this, do this, do this. And when it's all over, you go, well, they never did that. Well, there's processes to being able to do this, and do this. And sometimes you get them through, sometimes you don't. Joe Biden did a phenomenal job getting a lot of his agenda through that a lot of people said that there's no way he'd be able to do it. He did an unbelievable job. And that's why I have said on numerous occasions, and I'm going to praise him by the end of the show again, but, you know, on numerous occasions, why he is one of the most consequential and most successful presidents that we've ever had in the history of this country. But on the opposite side, the dumbest person that has ever run for office in the history of this country is Donald Trump. And he is running again for a third time. He was beaten 2 times in the popular vote. He was beaten in the popular vote and the Electoral College in 2020, as we all know. And I foresee him getting beat again in the 2024 election. It might be worse than it was with Joe Biden. Every time I see a poll, you know, we see polls all the time, and it gets worrisome at sometimes. And then the other time you're like, okay, this is a cakewalk. And then it's back to being tied, and it's all over the place. But if you just listen, and this is a lot like 2016, and this is why the Trump people thought that they were going to win, is because there was a groundswell of people that people weren't paying attention to. There was a buzz that people weren't paying attention to. Hillary Clinton was so strong, and she was such a heavy favorite, and she was winning in all these polls, that it was, for most people, a no-brainer that race and that election probably would have been called by 9 o'clock at night that night. But obviously it wasn't. It wasn't called until like 2 or 3 a.m. when they announced Donald Trump the winner in 2016, and people were shocked, and they weren't paying attention to that groundswell. They weren't paying attention to the feelings of what's going on. And I feel like that's what you're seeing now, but at least on the Kamala Harris side, not on the Donald Trump side. I think Donald Trump is losing more voters. He's not gaining voters, and any voters that he's gaining, he's losing a lot more than he's gaining. So I'm not even sure the ones that he's gaining are necessarily going to be the ones who are going to go out and vote, because the ones that he's really trying to get now are the people who listen to the like bro podcaster kind of guys like Theo Vaughn and Lex Friedman and other guys like this. Those are the guys that they are targeting, the guys who would never really go even bother registering voting. They love talking about politics, and they love going around and regurgitating nonsense that they hear and read on memes, but they don't really, you know, maybe I'll vote, maybe I won't. And they may pick up some of those, but you're still going to have the attitudes of those guys that are wanting to be part of the conversation, not knowing what they're talking about, and at the end of the day, still probably won't vote. But bottom line is, I feel like we're going to see a huge victory for Kamala Harris. I don't call anything in the bag, but I feel really good about this. I really do.